Welcome to Freedom to Learn, the podcast that champions choice in education, defends parental rights, and exposes the harm caused by school unions. I'm Jenny Gentles, Director of Education Freedom and Parental Rights at DFI, the Defense of Freedom Institute in Washington, D.C. A U.S. House Education and the Workforce Subcommittee recently held a lively education freedom hearing called Education Without Limits, Exploring the Benefits of School Choice. We're talking to participants in the hearing over a series of Freedom to Learn episodes, tackling the education myths that we heard and exploring the witnesses' key messages. Our guest today, Mike McShane, delves into what the school choice research really reveals. Dr. Michael McShane is Director of National Research at EdChoice. He's the author and editor of numerous books on education policy and countless articles. He's also a former high school teacher, and he earned a PhD in education policy from the University of Arkansas. Dr. Michael McShane, welcome to Freedom to Learn.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So you were a witness during a recent hearing on school choice in the U.S. House of Representatives. I got to sit behind you during that very lively and engaging and kind of fantastic hearing. What message did you want the committee and the listeners to hear?
I think the biggest one I want to hear is just like there's so much misinformation out there, which is weird. Like I hate being the person who's like, everyone's all up in arms about misinformation and disinformation and whatever. But so maybe I'll put it this way. Like there's so many things circulating out there about school choice that just aren't true. Like I see all this stuff and people make claims that are simply just like factually inaccurate. Yeah. And, or they're sort of like half truths, where like you could sort of claim that what you're saying is true, but taken in like the full context, you're like, that's obviously not true at all. So more than anything, like I was kind of ready to get that stuff thrown at me and for me to kind of give it back. I didn't end up really getting that. I got a few like sort of sympathetic questions of being like, hey, can you sort of live fact check what we've been hearing, which I was happy to do. But that was the main thing I wanted to get out of it, was like to actually just try and put some facts on the table of like what's going on. And I think we were able to do that. I hope that we walked away from that doing it.
I felt good. I felt good walking away from that hearing. I thought you did a great job. And so we'll delve into some of those claims and outrageous statements that were made throughout the hearing, and then how y'all responded in real time, and then maybe give you a chance to kind of be like, here are the points I wasn't able to make, but really do need to be made. I was surprised. You guys, as the four witnesses, there were three witnesses that were supportive of school choice, one who absolutely was not. And each of you were given 3 minutes. Typically it's 5. So you had a 3-minute opening statement. I heard you quote Milton Friedman.
I did.
Not so very surprising given the organization that you work for. What was the big thing that you wanted to get across there?
Yeah, it was really funny when they invited me. That was the first kind of thing that I took away from that. They said, you have a 3-minute opening statement. They're like, you can write a longer one and put in whatever you want to, but 3 minutes. So that's literally the first thing I did to prepare for this whole hearing, was I wrote that 3-minute thing. And that sort of framed everything I did from there. But I realized, I've only got 3 minutes. So can I tell a story? Right? Like I don't have like PowerPoint. I don't have any of these things. I just have my voice. So can I tell a story that will sort of resonate with people? And so I started and can I sort of set the right benchmarks? So I started with the role of government in education that Milton Friedman wrote 70 years ago, that sort of a lot of people point to in the sort of modern voucher movement, though they've been around longer than that, which is a piece of misinformation, which we can talk about more of, but they've been around longer than that. But Milton Friedman closes that piece by sort of predicting what might happen in the future if we have more school choice. And importantly, he doesn't say that the world will be perfect. He doesn't say that like all of the problems of education will be magically fixed overnight. But what he says is like, there'll be more variety of schools to choose from. There'll be more opportunity for children. There'll be competition amongst them, and the pace of progress will be accelerated. And so for me, I think like that's a very easy case to make that has happened. it's a difficult case to make that school choice programs are perfect and have solved all the problems, but like they very clearly expanded opportunity and the diversity of schools. So I just threw out statistics like this is how many schools participate in these programs. This is how many kids. Like absent these programs, that wouldn't happen. I cited some of the empirical literature on competition and of like the participant effects, and also pointed out that just like having 6,750 private schools choosing to participate in these programs, like that is progress in and of itself. So that was, I just tried to tell that story of like, this is what was predicted 70 years ago, and it's kind of come true. Or there's at least enough evidence to say he was onto something.
Right. If he was saying that there was going to be a decrease in government involvement in some aspects of education, widening of options, healthy increase in the variety of educational institutions.
Tick, 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 tick. Yeah, right?
These things happen. I appreciated that in your remarks, you were talking about the expansion of charter schools, magnet schools, homeschooling, and school choice program participation. We're talking about a variety of
all those things.
One type, not just one magic bullet.
For sure.
One magic option, a variety of options. And then you talked about the creation of new models that we're seeing, or the return to old, if you're talking about classical education. And then, of course, like there's the Montessori and Waldorf. So you're talking about a wide spectrum of options, because it's not like parents just want one alternative, one kind of model as an alternative to the residentially assigned government school. I'd love to like dig into the research a little bit as you represented, as you brought it to the committee. I'd like to acknowledge that you were the researcher on the panel. The research-related questions were generally directed at you, and you responded one time to a question about research by saying, "Research is boring."
That is now in the congressional record. My thoughts that research is boring.
Given your title, your dedication, lifelong dedication,
my vocation in life,
What the heck, Mike? Like what were you trying to do at that point?
No, to be honest with you, I think actually a lot of the research community has kind of moved past the kind of horse race stuff that we spend a lot of time talking about, of like the participant effects of school vouchers. Like there are not a lot of those new studies coming out. The Reach Center, which is like the big federally funded grant that was given to the folks at Tulane and others to study those, like they've been pretty open about the fact that they're not doing participant effect research or things anymore, because it's hard to do well. It doesn't necessarily really convince people. People don't actually care all of that much about the results. Like let's just say every single study of these has shown that massive increases in reading and math scores as a result of this. Like 90% of the objections would still be there. They would just be replaced by others. So the reason I talk about research sort of being boring is that, and this is for me as a school choice researcher, research isn't like the number one reason why I support school choice. I don't actually think it should be the number one reason that people should support school choice. So there's all of these other really important reasons. Because in any moment, like the way the research community works, like some new study could come out here, some new study could come out there, and we're supposed to like whipsaw back and forth. Like, no, that's actually not how this is supposed to work. Like research is supposed to inform things. Research is supposed to help us understand how these programs are working. But like ultimately the programs are based on like our values and like what we want the education system to look like, the opportunities we want to have available to people. And then we need to figure out how to do that well. It's sort of not as useful in saying, should we do this or should we not do this? Even though that's what a lot of people, particularly on the other side of the debate, really want it to be about.
One thing that's frustrating about these congressional hearings in my experience is that, yes, you have your opening statement and you have your written statement, and then you're asked questions during the hearing. But each member of Congress only has 5 minutes total, and they want you to keep your answer short. So,
that's the hard. You're exactly right. That is the hardest part of all of this, is to be like, because I was thinking like a lot of these studies are complicated, and understanding what the strengths and weaknesses are, all of them. It's like, I don't know if I can do that in like a minute or a minute and a half. So luckily I didn't have to get too far down the methodological rabbit hole, but it was wild.
Well, but when you were answering that question and saying that, yes, there's research and that's an aspect of it, but values is another aspect of it, I thought, okay, that was fantastic the way you answered so concisely, but that right there is something that there's more to be said. Like, what are you talking
Totally.
about when you're saying values? Do you mean the values of the individual, like family who's making the choice, the societal values, like whose values?
Yeah, I think my main one in thinking about like, should I support or oppose this policy? It's sort of like our values as a society, but I guess it's also our individual values of what sort of community we want to live in. So like for me, like ultimately, like my support of school choice comes from values that I have about like the inherent dignity of every human being and the right that they have to make decisions about their lives. It's the value that I place on family as being like the fundamental building block of our society, and sort of government that pre-exists government, and sort of government should exist to sort of support families. And so that's why I like this stuff. And like, if it can make math and reading scores better, like that's awesome. But to me, it's like aligning our public policy to support families and to respect the inherent dignity of all human beings. Like that's what I'm going for.
Okay, so it can make reading and math scores better in some of the research. Can you just kind of walk down the list that you ticked off in one or two of those concise answers on what we're seeing as far as the results? And like the good, the bad, the neutral, like, so
we put out this document I think we do it every other year, called the 1, 2, 3s of school choice. Where we basically summarize all of I shouldn't say all of it, because we do set methodological bars where like you have to be sort of high enough quality, because there's quote unquote research being done on school choice all the time, right? Like some newspaper publishes, here's all the test scores of the voucher kids and the test scores of public school kids, and here's 2 bars and one's higher than the other. And it's like, well, that's not really making like a quality claim there. So once you kick all of those out, we include something like 188 studies or things like that. And then in the actual description, we include even more, some of these things that are like meta-analyses, that are like studies of studies that try and combine all the effects to see what the average is across all the different studies. But like the long and the short of it is that the studies wildly trend positive. So like in the participant effects, so that's like test scores of students that are participating in this program, there's been all these randomized control trials, which is about the highest quality way in which you can study a question like school choice, where you literally hold a lottery and half the kids get it and half the kids don't. Then you can track their outcomes over time. Now, randomized control trials aren't perfect, because the types of programs that you're able to like randomize, tend to be smaller. Like you can't do that in like a massive statewide program. Like they have to be sort of smaller. And so there's questions as they scale. So they're not perfect themselves, but they're out there. But then the big thing, and the one that opponents of school choice never want to talk about, but is like the most consistent finding of all of them, is we call it competitive effects, but it's like the effects of these programs on the students who remain in public schools is overwhelmingly positive. In my written testimony, I cite, there's a meta-analysis by a group of people that if you were to like look at their publication record, they are wildly skeptical of school choice. And even they came out and said that this is positive and that people shouldn't be afraid of it. It's literally like in it, they said like should like allay the fears of people. So that's the clearest probably of all of the findings, is that it's good for the kids who are left behind in public schools. But then we track a bunch of other outcomes: segregation, civic values, or people more likely like vote or be politically tolerant or volunteer, any of that sort of stuff. Search the fiscal impact and satisfaction and safety. And again, the lion's share of all of this is positive.
And there are some studies you mentioned that like it's not showing positive or negative.
Yeah.
There's some that are negative.
Yes.
In these hearings, both in the one that you testified at, the one that I testified at a few weeks prior to that, those are the ones that are mentioned, the negative.
Yes.
Impacts. But you're saying over
all right,
80 studies.
We're going to do this. We're going to do this right now. Okay. Because I was ready to do this. And part of me has sort of wondered, like, the opponents of school choice now, like we saw in the written testimony that was for that hearing and a couple of others, like they have made it clear, like they are emptying the artillery, right? Like they're firing everything they've got at this. So we now know what all the arguments are. And if you look at the arguments that were given in that hearing and the social media stuff that you see online, it's all the same. Like the questions that are asked, you can go back to the school choice hearing from 2 years ago that like Lindsey Burke and Luke Messer and Denisha Allen did. Some of the questions are line for line the same. So
Yep.
like
congressional staffers don't just cut and paste, come up with new ones.
right. Or teachers union staffers. Who would say maybe they would draft them. Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. I don't know. I'm not going before these people anymore, so they have no reason to really go after me. But so part of me was sort of waiting because I don't think we've done the full like fusillade against this. Test scores are worse than in Hurricane Katrina or whatever. So I was gonna wait to drop that. But you know what, Jenny? We're doing this right now. I'm a river to my people. This is what we're going. Okay. So in all of these things that we see, opponents cite 3 places. You'll hear it over and over again. That it's in Indiana, Ohio, and Louisiana, right? You're nodding your head because you know what I'm talking about. So let's take a little tour around the Midwest here, Midwest and into the South. We'll start in Louisiana. So Louisiana, which is I included in my testimony and others, these are the only randomized control trials that have found negative results for the participants in school voucher programs. There were 2 studies. Both of those studies studied the same period of time. Right. So that's important to note. So they're basically like duplications of each other. So should they count as 2? We count them as 2. You probably shouldn't count them as 2, but we count them as 2 just to be fair. One of them only studied students for 1 year, and one of them followed students for 4 years. So both of those studies found in the first year of the expansion of the program, and like the first year students participated in it, big negative results. And I think in both reading and math. And the one study stops there. So when you see like the headline huge numbers that were negative for Louisiana, it's coming from that study. They were the worst ones there. Now, the other study continued following those students for 3 more years. Kind of makes me think we should pay more attention to that one. But shockingly, it's the other one that gets all the noise. In the second year, those declines were cut in half. By the third year, they were back to null, where the treatment and control group were equal to one another. And then in the fourth year, just in mathematics, there was a pretty good drop. So it was negative. It was only in math, but it was statistically significant and a pretty large finding. So after 4 years, they found a substantial decrease in mathematics scores, but not in reading scores. So let's talk about a couple things. Number one, that's weird. It's weird to see that pattern. Normally these trend, like things get worse, things get better, stay safe. To see like a drop, which would sort of make sense. Okay, first year in a program, that's crazy. Then to go back up only to drop again makes me think like there's probably something else happening here. It doesn't seem to make sense to me that a pattern, an inconsistent pattern like that would be due to the program itself, probably something happening on the outside. But the bigger thing, 2 things are important to note. One is that a similar group of researchers used that same randomization to look at later life outcomes and found 0 difference in college matriculation rates between those 2 groups. Mm-hmm. So it seems like, okay, there may have been some negative math findings, but it doesn't look like they stuck around later in life, or it seems like the kids later in life did fine. So not really this like catastrophic thing that people are super worried about. There's also, we could go even down the rabbit hole of what we think happened there. I mean, only 30% of Louisiana private schools participated in that program compared to like 70+% in Florida. So right. Can we generalize that to other programs? Probably not. Is there something else going on there? Did it also happen during the time when, I don't know, states were adopting the Common Core, and I don't know, private schools were going to be required to take Common Core aligned tests and then were shocked when they didn't want to participate? Who would have possibly seen that coming? But anyway, so that's Louisiana. But again, in all of our counts on it from EdChoice and everything, we include those 2 studies. Again, I don't think are like devastating to school choice. They're not great. Like, it's obviously not what you want to see, but they're included. The other 2 that they talk about are in Ohio and in Indiana. Okay. You could tell I was so ready for this. I was like on the plane on the way back. I'm like, why didn't anyone ask me this? I spent all this time getting ready for it. But
and that's why we're here today.
Yes. So in Ohio, it was a study done by the Fordham Institute, which, by the way, in some of the stuff they dinged us on the 1, 2, 3s because we include non-peer reviewed studies. Just to be clear, this was not a peer reviewed study, but it looked at both the participant effects, which is the students who participated in the program, and the competitive effects, which is what the program's effect was on the overall, or on the students who remain in public schools. The direct quote from the study is that the majority of students benefited from this program. Right? So taking all of that together, the authors themselves say that the overall effect of this program was positive. And this is the one that's supposed to be worse than Hurricane Katrina, just to put that out there. Yeah, right. And the participant effects, though, the way they had to do it, they weren't able to do a randomized control trial here. So what they did was the students at that time qualified based on the performance of their public schools. It was a quote unquote failing schools voucher, right? So it wasn't a universal program. You had to be in a failing school to get it. So what they did was they basically looked at students who were just above and just below the definition of failure, essentially making the point that it's like random, that it approximates randomness. If you were like 1 percentage point above or 1 percentage point below this, it's basically random. It's not actually random, but it's close enough, and you see what they're coming. The problem is when you only are able to study those kids, you have less ability to talk about kids that are farther away from that. So what you're basically taking is the best failing public schools and not being able to look at like the students who came from like the absolute worst schools, which you would imagine would have the most positive results. Mm-hmm. So they were not actually looking at a representative sample of the total program. And in fact, were probably leaving out the students who stood to benefit the most. And just like in Louisiana, which I didn't talk about, but is true here, and is frankly true in Indiana, which we'll talk about, the testing conditions aren't the same. Like if the public schools are being held accountable for taking these tests and the private schools just have to take them because there's things being evaluated, like the stakes are not the same. Their curriculum might not be aligned to this. So there's all sorts of reasons why this is messy and doesn't work. And just very briefly in the end, Indiana, by the author's own description, they found a modest decline in mathematics scores. They found no difference in reading scores. And again, they had to do one of these things where they had to approximate randomization that, again, made it difficult for them to make claims. And they say this as much in their paper. And this isn't a knock. I shouldn't say this isn't a knock on the Ohio authors. It isn't a knock on the Indiana authors. Like we say back home in Kansas City, you got to dance with the one that brung you. You do the best that you can with what you have. But the other important thing to look in the Indiana study was if we're going to use that bar of methodological rigor, a couple of years later, there was a study put out by one of the RELs, so by that right-wing den of cynicism, the federal government, that looked at
Mike, I'm going to stop you.
Yes.
You're not in DC anymore. You can't use acronyms.
Sorry. So it was like a regional education lab. Yeah. So it was basically the federal government's research arm. Yep. And it found that students had a substantial increase in high school graduation rates and college matriculation rates. So again, these like small or these modest mathematics findings didn't seem to carry out later in their lives. So anytime people bring up Louisiana, Ohio, or Indiana and think that they're these like devastating takedowns of that, it's just not true. Like, again, the Ohio one concluded that the overall benefit was positive. Indiana, long-term effects are good. Louisiana, long-term effects are null. Short-term effects are not great. But yeah, so all of that stuff is bunk. It's all wrong.
Okay. And we're talking 3 states.
Yes.
These studies have been kicked around for a while. So we're talking in a pre-universal school choice,
yeah. Oh yeah. That's the other thing is like some of this data is like, I think the Indiana study was like 2009 to 2014 or something. And I think the Ohio one was something similar. Yeah.
Okay. Well, what we do have is fresh NAEP data showing devastating effects, widespread devastating effects across the country for public school students, which somehow never comes up in these hearings. There's no acknowledgement that we have student results declining over a decade, plummeting since 2019, doubling chronic absenteeism, all of these outcomes. If we're worried about outcomes,
so this is the other sleight of hand that the opponents do that everyone needs to see. Mm-hmm. If you read, for example, like the written testimony of the Democrats' witness in that hearing, the first like third of it where she's citing Indiana and Ohio and Louisiana is all of these. Look at all this evidence. Look at all this evidence of negative outcomes. Evidence. But the second, like 2/3 where she's talking about the impact on public schools or on segregation or on students with special needs or any of those things, then it becomes entirely speculative. oh, these things could happen because these students are giving up their IDEA rights or whatever those, but there's no then the evidence just stops. They're like, oh wait, but do we have, so they'll cite like, here's 3 schools that say they can't accommodate students with special needs out of 6,750 or whatever. And that's where the evidence shows up. So it's this sleight of hand that no one ever seems to catch them in, but that's what's happening.
So could we label that as fearmongering?
Sure. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So I want to talk about a number of the claims that we heard, both from the witness and then also one side of the aisle and among the members of Congress. But before we delve into that, because we do need to address that IDEA
Sure.
and FAPE and a number of the other claims.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you were surprised by anything that happened and that was said. And I know tactically you were surprised because you didn't get a lot of questions.
Yeah. I mean, look, personally, why they didn't come after me is wild. Like, you had Walter and Jenny, who are just like the genuine article. Like, they are the real deal. Right. And with incredibly compelling stories.
Experiences.
Yeah. There's like incredibly compelling stories. Yeah. And that they kind of went after them and tried to like pick holes in their stories. Like, what are y'all doing? Like, this can't be the right tactic. Like, come after me and go after like who funds EdChoice or something. I don't know. Like, I'm a much softer target than these folks are. But yeah, so that seemed to me, yeah, it was nuts.
Well, I have to say, one of the things that surprised me a little bit was a number of the Democrats not acknowledging the NAEP scores, the chronic absenteeism specifically, but saying things like public schools are deeply segregated. The public school funding scheme is inequitable. And then the last one that stood out was that the criticism of the programs, that they only help a handful of students to get away, while the vast majority are stuck behind in a failing system. Those are 3 different Democrats acknowledging widespread failure on the part of the public system, and that kind of surprised me. Like, do you guys hear yourself? Like,
well, this is the funny thing too. Is it's like if you go on to like, I did a piece for Forbes a few months ago. It was like Bernie Sanders's. Like, if you go to his website when he was running for president, it was like, our public schools are underfunded and they're falling apart, and we're not able to do all the services and all of this sort of stuff. But when he's opposing vouchers, he's like, public schools are great. Like, no one needs to leave them. We've got, and so that's the problem that I think sort of defenders of the status quo system always find themselves in, is that when they're trying to get more money and more people and more whatever, they have to paint this dire picture. But then when that dire picture is used against them, they have to backpedal. So yeah, they're in trouble.
Yeah, it was interesting to watch it unfold in real time that day. Even the Democratic witness, who was extremely well educated, which was a point that was made during the hearing, and very sharp, and did a great job responding under a barrage of aggressive questions. I don't agree with anything that she said, but I feel like she held her own.
She fought her corner, as we'd say. She fought her corner. Yeah, for sure.
And it's hard to do. It's hard to kind of keep all the things that you're saying straight in the midst of that kind of environment. But I did hear her at one point repeatedly talk about how private schools can't serve certain groups of students. And isn't that awful? And then at another point say, well, private schools are so well resourced. Yeah. Only public schools had the resources.
Yeah.
Like, okay, you got to pick one.
Exactly.
You're really well educated. You're very smart. You're very sharp.
Yeah.
You got to pick one. So
totally.
I think that I'm not necessarily surprised by that, because, like you said, they were just kind of throwing everything, all the arguments out throughout the hearing. So there wasn't necessarily like a cohesive, thought out narrative. It's just like, here's everything that we always say, go. And then it doesn't matter if they're inconsistent in their arguments. All right. So let's talk about that. Public schools are the foundation of our democracy. 90% of students attend public schools, that we hear a lot. Thoughts on that? Yeah.
I mean, I feel like no matter whatever congressional, and Congress better than I do, but I feel like whatever hearing room you're in that moment is the bedrock of American democracy. Like, if you're in like the agriculture committee, it's probably like the American farmer is the whatever. And if it's, I don't know, if you're in transportation or something, the train locomotive driver drives the wheels of industry or something. So No, I mean, and again, the irony of all of this, of like the people that were in that room who went to private schools themselves, the occupants of the White House, or who sit on the Supreme Court, or even, like I said, in that committee, even some of the people that were on, some of the members were saying like, well, I went to private schools, or I sent my kids to private school. It's like, well, then obviously like it can't be that bad because it made you and you're here. So I've never really gotten that one either.
Right. Yeah. So let's set that aside. On the 90% of students attend public schools,
oh yeah,
which is a favorite thing. You guys have some.
Yeah, so we do this. We calculate this thing called the EdChoice share, where we look at like how many kids are in various. And so it depends on how you count. I think probably about 75% of kids are in what we think of as like kind of traditionally zoned public schools. Another 5% or so are in like open enrollment programs. Then you've got another like 7%-ish that are in charter schools. So again, this is one of those wild ones that usually when they want to tip it up to like 90%, charter schools are suddenly public schools again. Cause it's really about 80, and then it goes up to like 87 if you count, public charter schools. And then the rest are either in private schools or homeschooled. So it's either 80% or 87% if you want to think about it, but it's really sort of 75% in sort of residentially assigned public schools.
It baffles me how much the homeschoolers just get like dropped out of the equation. They'll say 10% in their minds, like 10% are in private school, 90% public school, the end. Like, you got to acknowledge, especially post-COVID.
Yeah, for sure.
Homeschool community. And as much as you don't like these private school programs, you have to acknowledge that there are an increasing number of options and parents taking advantage of them. I have two more of the common pervasive myths that came up that I wanted to throw out, and then happy to wrap up with any that you heard. School choice, education. Well, they don't say education freedom. Voucher schemes and scams benefit billionaires, but so that's one thing. We won't even go there. But the voucher schemes and scams hurt rural schools and communities. We heard that one a lot.
Yeah. Well, like the benefit billionaires one is a weird one to me. It's like, is somebody making money off school? What are you talking about? Anyway. Yeah. This is the other thing. And I have been, look, related to all of these is this underfunded. So we have these underfunded rural schools. Remember this, the state that I know best is Missouri. I don't know every state's funding formula or others, but if you rank order Missouri school districts by spending, the highest spending on a per pupil basis are small rural school districts, because they don't have the economies of scale. You have basically like state level requirements, I think, on staffing and things, and you don't have the economies of scale to support that. So like on a per pupil basis, they're spending huge amounts of money. Now that data may be slightly dated, but this, I think, relies on a sort of outmoded view of private school choice or educational choice, and that it has to take you to a brick and mortar like Catholic school. That, these rural communities don't have a like 400 person private elementary school. And it's like, yeah, but you have all of these micro schools that are popping up. You have co-ops, you have all of these things that are happening all over the country. So no, like, okay, maybe it won't lead to the creation of a full school, but you might have 20 kids form a micro school somewhere. And again, I don't think that that's like a devastating thing for the local public school. And even if it is, I don't think it's worth like holding those students hostage to a better outcome, So, so I don't think the rural one, I think the rural one relies on a sort of misapprehension of where the kind of energy of sort of new school creation and stuff is, and it just isn't there.
It does generally come back to the rural school. The school district is the largest employer in the community. And so that will be devastating. And that's a little bit revealing that you are giving kind of talking points from the union who wants to make sure that they keep their membership up and their dues rolling in. And of course it goes to fearmongering. Last one on my list is something that we've alluded to in this idea that these voucher scams and schemes, and of course, there's scams and schemes always in the way, and it's always vouchers. It's never education savings accounts and the wide variety of mechanisms that are out there, that they harm students with disabilities, which was pretty galling to repeatedly make that claim in a hearing where one of the witnesses is making it very clear that she has multiple children with dyslexia who were not going to be served by the public school system, and she was desperate to find other options and has been able to do that through Arizona's ESA program. What do they call it? Empowerment Scholarship?
I think so. I think that's right.
So thoughts on that?
Well, that's the thing is it's all
rights claim.
Jenny was the only one who brought any evidence. Like she actually had evidence of like, this is what my children were offered. So this IDEA of which you speak that supposedly has these like ironclad guarantees of the services that my child is going to get was like 30 minutes of reading support a week. That's what I was getting out of all of this. So, and again, it's like the bigger question is like, so wait, all of these families, like north of 100,000 in Florida participate in the empowerment accounts for unique abilities, FESUA. Like, why would all of them give up? If these protections are so amazing, why the second these families get the chance, they head for the doors? Like, is there no curiosity about what's going on there? Like maybe, just maybe, these like paper guarantees don't actually play out in people's lives. Like they don't actually provide the sort of support that they say that they do. So like, that's like the long and the short of it is like, yes, a lot of these schools do not have to abide by IDEA, but the schools where they do, the kids aren't getting served. So maybe we should try something different.
They're not getting served. They have to sue.
That's the other thing. It's like how many of these families have to sue or threaten to sue or all that? Yeah, for sure.
Right. And then the point that I think about as a parent who had a child with an IEP and another child with a 504, I didn't lose my FAPE rights, my rights to free appropriate public education. I chose to pull my children out of the residentially assigned public school and enroll them in private schools that were quiet and met their needs. And if I want to like take advantage of my FAPE rights, I can do that again. They're not gone forever. So this like fearmongering that you have to stay in public school or else you lose your ability to get this lousy level of service and accommodations and attention to your child. You lose your FAPE rights is really unkind, I think, to vulnerable, overwhelmed parents. Okay, so those are kind of my big things that came up. I actually have pages of notes from all the claims that were made up. So over the course of the Freedom to Learn podcast, I hope to tackle all of them. Any of the others claims that stuck out to you?
So the big one for me was around segregation, which was just stated like as a fact. And I have to recommend, if you are involved in the school choice movement, I'm going to give you a little reading assignment. It's a little bit long, but it's incredibly well written and interesting and fascinating. Michael Bendis, who's a lawyer for the Institute for Justice, wrote a law review article in the Syracuse Law Review last year called "School Choice is Racist and Other Myths." And he like methodically goes through the claims, both the historical claims that like the genesis of these programs was in segregation. He like tells the story of every place where they were used and how that's not what actually happened. He goes through like the contemporary empirical literature that like I, as a PhD haver, say like he nailed it. Like he described them so well and so accurately. And then he also goes through like all of the legal side of it too. So it's like all three bits where you might ever get a question about this or ever debate or discuss this with anyone. It is like the most lights out case. I recommend everyone read it. Because both the historical case is wrong, that like the history of school vouchers is not one of racism. Both the empirical literature is one showing that it improved in almost all of the studies that have studied this have shown that it was a positive effect. And like all of the legal case that anyone wants to make about this is all like a house of cards that all falls apart. So that came up a bunch in there and is all wrong.
All right. So Michael Bendis
star.
Needs to be a guest on the Freedom.
Seriously, please have him on there. Have him talk about this. I cannot tell you. It was probably of all the stuff that I read, and I read so much to get ready for that hearing, including things that I wrote myself. it was the best. It was the best of anything. It was so good. Everyone should read it.
So speaking of things that you write, I actually saw that you recommended that particular law review article on your Substack. So how can people follow your work, follow what you write?
So we launched, the research team at EdChoice launched a Substack called Informed Choice. So you can look that up on Substack and subscribe. We do it twice a week. We do all sorts of like research stuff. We do fun stuff on it as well. I mean, fun in relative terms, but, lots of that stuff that's there. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at MQ_McShane or X or whatever the hell it's called now. But, and then I'll obviously checking out EdChoice's website and all that good stuff. Check out EdChoice's website. Make sure you get your copies. There you go. EdChoice products, the ABCs of school choice, and then the 1, 2, 3s, I think you said was the compilation of research. These are incredibly helpful resources. I refer to them when I'm preparing for congressional hearings and other activities. Well, Mike, thank you so much for your commitment to education freedom, for doing a fantastic job at this hearing, and thank you for joining Freedom to Learn. Thanks so much for having me. Freedom to Learn is a production of the Defense of Freedom Institute. You can learn more about DFI at dfipolicy.org. If you have feedback or suggestions for future podcasts, please reach out to us at podcast@dfipolicy.org. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave a rating and review wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.